I finished planting the tank about 10 days ago, but about 2 or 3 days after I planted the tank, I started seeing algae already. I think that is because I started dosing a liquid fertilizer right away. I did a lot of research on the internet, and quite a few people said that you shouldn't dose at all in the first month. You should give the plants time to develop roots before the fertilizer can be taken up. And so I thought, yeah, that makes sense. So I stopped dosing the fertilizer, and that seemed to help quite a bit. But the other thing I thought of was DIY carbon dioxide. And I remembered that I had some of these little things that I bought quite a few years ago, because I had been interested in DIY carbon dioxide before, but I never actually did it. So this time I got down right to it, got out a 2-liter bottle, mixed up some yeast and sugar, and got it all set up. And within hours, I started seeing bubbles coming up from my air stone. I don't have a diffuser yet, so I'm using an air stone. But, I was really surprised to see that there were bubbles after just a couple of hours. The thing that really surprised me, though, was that the next day, all the little green leaves had turned a brighter green. They looked so vibrant. Such a vibrant green they had turned. And they even seemed to have grown a lot already. Of course, the Ludwigia didn't turn green, it turned red. The Ludwigia, actually, I was worried about because I gave it iron tablets, but it didn't go red when I gave it the iron. But after the CO2, yes, the very next day it started turning quite a deep red. So I was very happy with that. But, it makes sense that plants should need CO2 because their life is based on carbon, and you don't get carbon from NPK or trace elements. There's no carbon in the trace elements. There's no carbon in the NPK. So where would a plant get carbon from? We need to dose CO2. Yeah, we need to inject CO2 into the tank, yes. Because that's where the plant will get carbon from. And it uses actually way more carbon than it would use of NPK. The amounts of NPK that plants use is quite small compared to the amount of carbon that it needs. So for a water plant, it's kind of like trying to drown them if you just leave them in water with no CO2. They're gasping for air. That's why they don't do too well without CO2. Of course, there is a little bit of CO2 naturally in the water, but it may not be enough. So I think that's why, I think that injecting CO2 is a good thing. I think DIY CO2 is fine, especially if you have some nano tanks, like one, 2, or 3 nano tanks. Maybe after that you might want to think about getting a pressurized system. But I think if you only have a few nano tanks or just one big tank, DIY is good, yeah. I believe that I will be using, from the way this one is going, I believe that it will only cost me 1 cup of sugar per week to do the whole thing. So that's about 50 pounds of sugar for the year, and that's not too bad for the whole year of carbon dioxide. There were some other tips about carbon dioxide as well, though, that were given by the winemakers. the winemakers are all saying that baker's yeast is not the best yeast to use for it. If you go to a wine shop and get a wine yeast or a champagne yeast, champagne yeast is supposed to be the best because it can tolerate high levels of alcohol. So when the yeast is metabolizing, when it's living its little life, it's producing alcohol as a waste product. See? So the alcohol is actually toxic to the yeast. So that's what kills the yeast. It's not lack of sugar. It's, you know, the content of the alcohol that usually kills it off. And that's what makes it stop producing carbon dioxide. So if you get champagne yeast, you will get quite a few more weeks out of one bottle than you would get with baker's yeast. Also, if you give the yeast more nutrition, so we can't just live on sugar. It's like us eating cotton candy every day and expecting to be healthy. No, the yeast needs more than sugar. So some of the suggestions they had were to add some kind of fruit juice to the water. Another person suggested chopped up raisins. And one person also said that nutritional yeast might be good to add because they hadn't tried it, but they thought that it might work because the nutritional yeast, being a dead yeast, it would decompose in the water and release all the nutrients that yeasts need in their bodies. And that makes sense to me. I haven't tried it, but I'm hoping to try it. I want to make a video about all the things you can add to the CO2, to the yeast bottle when you're doing your DIY CO2. And so that's what I'm going to be doing over the next few weeks, is experimenting with additions to the yeast bottle. And I hope that that will make a quite interesting video. So that's it for me. I think I've covered everything, yeah. And I will see you next time. Thank you for being with me today. See you.